welcome. Can I have just a show of hands? How many people are from Connecticut? Yeah, and Massachusetts, and Great Barrington, yeah, and Iowa, one, and thank you for coming, everybody. So this is essentially a retrospective, because the earliest photographs are from the 70s, which is almost half a century ago. And so I carry with me the burden of a long perspective and supposedly we're at an inflection point now. We're about to lose the life support systems of the biosphere that, allow us to be. I started photographing trees coming out of the door of the cabin my father built in the 60s. Very convenient for a young man coming of age. And after teaching photography in Washington, D.C. for 2 years, I returned from the inner city to the outer scape. But of course was surrounded by a forest, having brought with me from my youth my power of observation that I inherited from my father, always looking at trees, evaluating them as an arborist. I transposed that to the photographic arts. 1970, as I was telling Donald Ross, whom I met in '71, was the occasion for the launch of the Route 44, Route 7 bypass and superhighway through western New England. So that shocked me into a response of citizen activism. And of course, it was just in the aftermath of the first Earth Day. So those various influences were coming into my becoming who I am. I think we're going to now start talking about, that's by way of general background, and having been born and raised and still living in the same place now 3/4 of a century later, that even amplifies my sense of place and my attention to change. I'm going to stand where Donald and Helen are and just refer to the American elm in this photograph. It happens to be the Baldwin Hill elm that became the inspiration for the formation of Elm Watch in 1999. We'll come around and talk more about it when we see a series of the elms in Four Seasons. But it's about the sacredness of trees, obviously, and that particular image was chosen to be on the cover of Speak for the Trees. So it became an iconic image in terms of over the period of my 50 years of photography. It happens to be the state tree of Massachusetts. I hope all you Massachusetts residents are aware of that. And was
the species or the actual tree?
if you ask a question, I'm going to.
Species or the actual tree?
The American elm as a species was dominant in the state of Massachusetts, but really throughout the Northeast from Connecticut and through New England. And Tom Campanella writes eloquently about the history of the American elm in New England in his Yale University book. Let's move, I'm going to move into this corner just to say, it soon became obvious to me that I was photographing a diversity of species and going into places in 1978, such as Robin Swamp in Falls Village, and photographing a shagbark hickory, actually 2 of them, that had obviously grown in a pasture land at the time with lower broad spreading crowns that record the life history of the tree. The shape is a record of its life, and it retains the shape unless it's being distorted, as occurs these days, by snagging and encapsulation by bittersweet invasive vines. But this is to bring us to another comparison of the chronology. from the pre-invasive era, when the woods appeared as they did when I was a Boy Scout, and as they appeared 50 years earlier and 100 years previously. It's still in Falls Village, up on the shoulder of Canaan Mountain on Great Mountain Forest, maple and cherry. And I do have extra announcements on the table out front for anyone who wants to grab one for their refrigerator. From the top of Monument Mountain, which many of you passed by coming here, I spotted in 1995 or 6 this white explosion on the landscape to the east, and then followed that path and drove till I found the location of an apple tree, a wild apple tree, on the edge of what was a pasture land with the beginnings of invasive encroachment. And now this is a rare experience. In my youth, we used to, my first job was working for the National Forest Service, surveying the landscape for ribes, gooseberries and currantberries that hosted the infection for white pine blister rust. So I've been out there looking at trees intently for a long time. And these were common back in my youth. But now that's the end of that era of what is a human intervention and the introduction of apple trees to North America and so forth. But when you see one in the wild, give it a hug. This one is particularly gorgeous, and I caught it at the right moment. So that goes to the question, another facet of timing. And I'm going to break for a second and just read this. Portraits of Trees, the photography of Tom Zetterstrom. This is about timing. Tom Zetterstrom's trees have a strange and at times almost excruciating beauty. They are so familiar in their supple, occasional, and awkward verticality and the way they gather together like school children at recess, or show off like prom queens, or glue their bodies together in celebration, maple and cherry. With his sculptural intelligence and understanding of light, Zetterstrom does something rare among photographers of trees. He gives them consciousness. He seems to have caught them at the moment they notice the camera. They acknowledge us, step away toward the camera, wonder what we will do, wave their limbs in our direction. Zetterstrom's trees and humans are children of one nature. So that is Michael Brenson, former New York Times art critic. I couldn't have said that. I'm not even sure I could have imagined or created that thought, but I take the, should we say, the abuse to read it to you, because it is about the moment is pretty important. And how I achieved that relationship from individual tree to individual tree, had to do with my growing knowledge of the woodlands that surround me. Cornel Kappa said something interesting about photography half a century ago. If your photographs aren't that good, get closer to your subject. And I was sort of wondering, what does he mean? Don't use a telephoto lens, use a wide-angle lens and step up to it? No, that's not what he meant. He really meant understand your subject, and engage with it. We're going to circle around this corner, and then we're going to move into this room, which is going to be a little narrower corridor for us to maneuver through. But just going down, since you're out standing here, here we see gray birches and white birches in Norfolk. And there's a little dance going on there structurally. And it's a pasture land, and indeed it was a sheep pasture at the time. And, shall we say, life is in balance there. Here we start to see the effect of the loss of balance. This is a eastern hemlock at the far western point of Virginia, where the Appalachian Trail crosses up over to Mount Rogers, the highest peak in Virginia. But it's looking skeletonized as the hemlock woolly adelgid begins its process of defoliation. An introduced species, by the way, an insect pest that has basically eliminated hemlocks from New Milford, Connecticut south. So we see an awareness of transition here. Again, invasives are part of the problem. Here we see another beautiful pre-invasive wetland of the Housatonic River at the convergence with the Concopat in Ashley Falls. Now, when I took this picture, I was just captivated by the delineation of the structure of the trees, the sketch, the little drawing that it was. But fortunately, when I brought it in to John Zarkowski at Museum of Modern Art, he said, a little Emerson, P.H. Emerson, a great photographer of the previous century in the southern bottomlands of the Carolinas and so forth. And he acquired it. I thought, okay, that's pretty encouraging, thank you. And along with a couple of moving point of view, which were in the early stages of evolution. This, you still might find this in this situation, but quite honestly, right up here on the roadside, we see evidence of Japanese knotweed. When you go upstream to the Sheffield Covered Bridge and look north, you only see Japanese knotweed, an extensive monoculture all the way to the horizon, following the curves of the river. Without intervention or management, the inevitable effect of the most insatiable plant on the planet will be to consume our wild and scenic Housatonic River throughout the Berkshires and into Connecticut to the Long Island Sound. Let's keep thinking about the east. Here's like the elm, for people in Sharon, here is an iconic tree historically of the Twin Oaks field in a Sharon Land Trust property that was a keynote emblematic location, really, a destination land trust property. Okay, so in 2012 and then in 2014, one tree collapsed after the other. Do I have those numbers right, the dates? Yeah. And so this no longer exists at all. However, the Land Trust 10 years ago did a lot of fundraising and planted 2 white oaks just up positioned from those, and those are actually starting to take form right now, and it's working. So this is called a cultural landscape. This really relates to on the magnificent mega level management for aesthetics of the landscape. And it's probably the case that those oaks were originally planted by whoever owned that very large farm 200 years ago. But I don't even know that history for sure. But they were really defining these as shade trees, pasture trees. And of course the elm provided that service sort of automatically in the landscape going back to the 1800s and earliest settlement. Here, a cherry. This is an introduced tree at Hyde Park over on the Hudson River. I shot that in the winter of '93, the so-called blizzard of '93. And again, it was about the moment. The blizzard was my co-conspirator in turning that tree into art. We can talk a little bit about art, and if you have questions, what makes this art versus, God, any number of photographs of trees that people are taking with their iPhones or whatever these days, is probably too delicate a intellectual question to unravel here. But unless somebody has any ideas.
Oh, I do.
You do?
Yes.
Speak up.
The exquisite presentation.
Mask.
The Exquisite presentation.
Oh, thank you.
That's just the most
Okay.
official reason.
Presentation certainly has part of it to do with it. Okay, I give it a lavish mat. I'm trying to, and I'm keeping the size small, by the way, as a aspect of intimacy. Try to, in other words, you'll see some bigger prints in the other room. They're doing a different thing and they're from a different portfolio. So it's, and preciousness, I guess I would say, is part of the equation. And I guess the, boy, to use the word again, excruciating challenge of printing these things in the darkroom, just so. And so they are, by the way, someone mentioned to me after my last talk, don't forget to mention, these are silver prints. These are not, didn't come out of a computer and a printer. These came out of trays with, developer stop, bath, and fixer, as a wet piece of paper that had to be washed for an hour and so forth and so on. Okay, so we're in the West. I've gone to the West on half a dozen trips inspired by various things. I knew I needed to get sycamores and sequoias and bristlecone pines, and the difference between the diversity and the species of the West is extraordinarily different than the East. Really, the Mississippi River defines two different ecosystems. The West is predominantly conifer, but hey, they have some glorious deciduous trees as well. So hey, I got an email this morning about sequoias from my friend Jay Pickering, who had traveled with me to California in the early 90s. And as I walk around, you can then maneuver around and look at these, of course, the giant forests of Sequoia National Park. And the news item this morning was that tens of thousands of trees are going to need to be cut in the vicinity because of the drought and fire damage there. And okay, these are trees that have lived for 2,000 years. So here we are back to that inflection point. 2,000 years is unraveling as we listen to the radio. And yeah, I don't where to take that thought. My favorite psychiatrist is here, Irwin Avery, and maybe he can help us work it through our psyche a little bit as we wind down the talk. The coastal oak, okay, so that's up at around 6,000 feet. The coast oak is around 60 feet above sea level, and has its totally, and is an evergreen oak basically. It's in the white oak family, and it has occupied a space and that records its evolution and its development along the shores. I mean, the Pacific Ocean is just within view further down there. I saw that tree out of the corner of my eye in the passenger seat as we were heading south from Carmel, and I said, geez, Jay, we got to stop. So hey, then we spent the morning there. It took me many rolls of film, 8 pictures per roll, to come to grips with it. But I still couldn't understand it as I stood there looking at it. I could only understand it when I reduced it to 2-dimensional contact sheets. And then I could find the center of the universe, because I didn't know where the center of the universe was when I was standing in the middle of the universe. This tree is at 11,200 feet. That's the grove of bristlecone pines, a very rare tree that grows on the upper ridges of, in this case, the White Mountains on the California-Nevada border, or in various high elevation areas of the Nevada, and is indeed the oldest living tree on the planet. The mother tree of them all is 4,500 and some years old. Imagine that. Now, as I mentioned, my earliest job as with the U.S. Forest Service, doing the picking of the currantberries and gooseberries to interrupt that fungal cycle of white pine blister rust. Unfortunately, now that disease has reached this area from the east. So while we were losing white pines that might have been 50 or 80 years old, that were the first succession plantings, spontaneous plantings in the aftermath of abandonment of farmland, we didn't really have any capability even imagining, okay, that ratio of a plant, a fungal host, killing a 80-year-old tree did seem unfair, quite honestly, but this is beyond unjust. Okay, so there's going to be several messages of this sort. Erwin, you're going to have to help us out later. Yeah, so this is the bristlecone pine, and I may have been gesturing in the wrong direction. This happens to be limber pine, and this is up on Donner Pass. This is 2005. So listen, why don't you all circulate into that corner and I'll step out. The limber pine is also up around 11,000 feet. And that was another blizzard coming as I dashed out of San Francisco to get up on the high elevation before the snow arrived. And got the shot. And I guess, so my timing was good. Was I there at the moment the tree recognized the photographer? Maybe. I'd probably never seen a photographer before. Here we're coming down to Joshua Tree National Monument, where you can see palm trees growing at 49 Palms Oasis, near the town of 29 Palms, California. The oasis is down here, and that was the only tree visible in the entire landscape. So it's very site-specific. In fact, think about it, all of these species are very site-specific. And we'll talk about that further as we maneuver around. Also in Idaho, you see these trees in the west, really from Nebraska going west, the big western cottonwoods that are huge and create their own little ecosystem wherever there's a drainage area and moisture. Here at the Jackson Hole, okay, so the Tetons are up here, and it's after sunset. This is a long exposure, so there's even movement in the branches there if you look carefully. But I love the graphic quality of it. And it's, again, a very specific type of spruce, black spruce. It's a swamp tree, and generally doesn't achieve much stature, but God, look at the height of those narrow, spindly. There's no diameter reduction up the entire length. That's almost a straight log telephone pole, but wow, what a difference in form compared to this, which is broad crown spreading and with muscular branching leader subdivision and so forth. So again, this is about just admiring the adaptability of these plants to the setting and to the way they define themselves. This copse is growing out in Oklahoma. I went down there in April of whatever that was, 96, thinking, March, April, things are not really happening for me photographically at that time of the winter. And so I thought, okay, I'll go into the advanced season, and got that shot. I'm just so happy about it. It's one of those things you just pass by. You never could have thought about it or imagined it, but it's one species of trees, and it's a copse that's maybe growing from one root system, or it's just a little community of its own kind. Here, a yellow willow in Oregon was, one of those cruises. I think this was 92. Actually, it was after the Day in the Life of America. I actually went out and did a long trip around the West and came across this tree. And so speaking of Jeopardy, the photographer in Jeopardy, I knocked on the door of the little shack that was nearby there, and no one came to it. I was thinking, hey, I want to park here. I just want to take a picture of that tree. And then I got out there and I did my thing, and then the guy kind of comes up behind me and says, people get shot for less than that around here. So I said, I'll send you a picture. I'll send you a copy of the picture. Jeez. Okay. So in 2002, I went out. I got a grant from the Bosch. No, was that no? From the art fund of the Berkshire Botanical Community Foundation to get out west and shoot after that severe fire year of 2001-2. And this is what I came back with. I got several shots, but really this was the keeper. And again, it's about the graphic structure. So, hey, what makes that art? A lot of things, but think about it. Each one of those trees is a charcoal pencil. It's only charcoal now. And indeed, it could have been drawn with a charcoal pencil. And so the circumstance there is, again, the commitment of the artist to getting into some space where he doesn't really know where he's going is, thankfully, with the help of the 93 Euro van parked way down in the ravine area, I was able to figure out, okay, I went to the Forest Service and said, hey, where are the interesting burn areas? They sent me up there because there had been a blowdown and then a burn. So, hey, layers of impact. And so I snowshoed in around and got up onto the space. And by now it's, it's light snow and just a white sky. So everything is combined, earth and atmosphere. And, but it's only half an hour from sunset. So I'm photographing away and away and away, but the light conditions are perfect. So, then I'm trying to figure out, okay, it's going to get dark soon. Now, the van should be back in that direction. Of course, this is not a trail. This is not a path with little signs that identifies the trees or anything. So I just bushwhacked out, and I made it back to the van and camped out there that night. So that has been the occasion for a lot of these. In the case of these western cottonwoods, hey, I was in a little, compact rental car, the cheapest thing you could buy, and I had my sleeping bag and just bagged out there, and, I realized the next morning, geez, I picked a pretty good place, Berkshire, BLM land. And, anybody could have been there, a hunter, cows could have been grazing in there or whatever. Now, I should say, at this point, before we move into that room, should I take an opportunity for questions? Yes, Jennifer.
What do you think about trees communicating with each other?
Well, I'm not a spiritualist in that sense, but I understand from the book that is written by Dr. Simard, is that her name?
Right.
Am I right? Yeah. There are dynamic interactions that relate to root systems and sharing of nutrients and apparently some kind of signaling. Stress hormones is what it boils down to. Hey, trees have hormones too, by the way. That's say again?
Smell.
And smell.
They put out odors and stuff.
Yeah. And so there's a sensory apparatus going on there. I don't know enough about the science to, get religious about it, quite honestly. But the dynamic functioning of the ecosystem is extremely complicated, and it goes all the way down to microbes in the soil, which we now do recognize play a very important part of nutrient exchange, and so forth. And when you think about these burn areas, you can imagine the temperatures that have been achieved here just are frying the soil, sterilizing it, quite honestly. Helen.
I had a very prosaic question, and that's, you work in large format? What kind of camera?
Oh, yeah, okay.
What's
So
your
let's.
setup? Like, with the guy in the cabin, what did he see you do?
Yeah, okay. Can you come back to that question in room 3?
Okay.
That would be great. Helen is an author of numerous novels and lives in Lakeville with her husband, Donald Ross. Okay, any other questions?
Have you ever been tempted to work in color?
Yeah. we could talk about that in the third room too. Yeah. So color, garish color. Yeah, I have used it. Yeah, and indeed, when I responded to that highway proposal in 1970, color slides, 35 millimeter carousel slide projectors, but I was using them for didactic reasons, show and tell. And so we can return to that question because I'll talk more about that. Yeah, Irwin.
What is the creative process of you actually creating the print?
Oh,
What are
okay.
you responding to? Is that for the other room too?
Well, no, not necessarily.
Relates.
I guess I should have brought a contact sheet in. So, from my earliest days at Housatonic Valley Regional High School Camera Club through Colorado College, Pratt Institute, still shooting 35 millimeter, and you learn to hunt down with a scope over the contact sheet. It's 1 by 1.5 inch image, and you're studying that thing as hard as you can, like a microscope, and you're seeing if you've got composition, good lighting, and so forth. All the requirements of a properly printed image. Hey, I mean, the ratio of those that got printed to the ones that were exposed on the contact sheet is 1,000 to 1 or more. It's geez, I have boxes and boxes of negatives and contact sheets, year by year stacked up. I don't know what archive is going to want those, but and then I have a bunch of negatives down in the safe deposit box in Canaan. A little precious of me, perhaps, but at any rate, it's a trial and error process, and you don't really, whereas you could now check the back of the camera and see if you got the shot, after one of my shoots, 4 to 6 weeks or something like that, I don't have any idea what I got, I went to China in '81, and I had a I shot both black and white and slide color film, and so I was indiscriminate. But I didn't want to go to China and think that I should have not limited myself, so I shot both, and the resulting exhibition actually was called Faces of China, and it was both in black and white and color. In fact, it integrates perfectly. It's like it's not about whether it's one or the other. It just works. Let's see. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, a little bit. It's the process that actually, so a good number of that stuff is just thrown away.
Yeah, yeah.
And then how do you decide what to keep?
Okay, so you got to be pretty
perfect.
ruthless, because hey, when you start investing in the printing of a certain image, you're in it for a few hours before you realize it. And indeed, you're running through silver paper, and it's a, you're exposing it, you're dodging and burning, you're learning the manipulation. The manipulation of the dodging and burning is a little, like a puppeteer doing a dance over the film, over the paper, while your 20-second exposure is happening, and you got to figure it out. Okay, you got to add and subtract, a huge amount of that. The print of the bristlecone pine is almost humanly impossible to print, except that I was able to do it because I was committed to it. You could not bring that negative to a lab and ever get a satisfactory print, even if you were paying $1,000 for it.
It's a huge amount of work.
It's a huge amount of work, yeah. Oh, listen, and a zillion of those pieces of paper go in the trash, before they even get to the washer. You just didn't get it. Yeah, so that print happens to be pretty expensive as a result, I should say. And but hey, I could never. I made what I got of those, and I'll never attempt that again. I don't think anybody could come up with an incentive to go through that turmoil again. At my age. So.
Which print was that? Which one was that?
Right there,
Oh, yeah.
bristlecone pine, which is almost a translucent tree at that stage in the photograph. I'm going to come to you, Roger, in a minute. because I have, okay, to get into that detail, I cut out a silhouette of this tree and attached it to a wire. And during exposure, I held that thing as carefully as I could over place without creating a reduction of light to certain other areas next to the branches. So that was my technique, because the sun is actually back there. I'm shooting against the sun. So the range of density in the negative is about at the maximum, and I'm trying to soften it to bring it into this view. And what works in this print, and by the way, it's in Michael Brenson's collection and in Donald Hall's collection, and numerous museum collections, but the tree never rots up there at 11,000 feet. It's in an arid zone, and all this is limestone. So it's a very high pH. So it only supports that species in that location. And it doesn't rot because it's dry, and because the annual rings are so full of resin, there's no opportunity to rot. The only way that tree disappears over time is through wind and sand erosion. Gradually, the cells are broken down layer by layer on the outside. So it's it's the reverse of adding annual rings of growth. It's reduction of annual rings of growth. So there's so much to know about these trees. And of course, when you do core samples of these and so forth, you have a record going back thousands of years of ecosystem function. Thank you. All right, so the American elm behind me is the same tree as we first looked at, which is the Baldwin Hill elm, right smack between North and South Egremont on Baldwin Hill, and is the most photographed and painted tree in Berkshire County, and deserves to be, quite honestly. So my photographs of it, two of which were initially acquired by the Library of Congress, actually with the support of a gift from, I forget the name of the person now, but then later all four went in there. And that was, I thought, geez, the tree has been preserved as an image. But Dutch elm disease, another invasive fungus, right, will kill that tree next year, 10 years, whatever, regardless of other chemical issues or whatever. The dominance of the invasive fungus is unsurpassed, and was responsible for killing 98% of the American elms in the Northeast, over 111 million trees, many of which were planted as street trees on every town in Massachusetts. So under that tree, George Wislocki, the founding director of Berkshire Natural Resources Council, and I stood with Mrs. Turner, the lady of the farm, and on the occasion of Berkshire Natural Resources acquiring the development rights and perpetual agricultural land it is now. So so we then concluded, well, we better get this tree injected with a fungicide, a chemical that kills the fungus or prevents it from establishing. So in 1999, this was the premier adopted elm of Elm Watch, and has been injected every 3 years since then by the adopter, Eric Haupt Tree Service, tree company. And then we ended up forming Elm Watch and mapped all the 100 trees throughout Berkshire County, adjacent New York and Northwest Connecticut, of 36 inches, 32 inches or greater in diameter. We even had the Connecticut DOT working for us toward that objective, and the Mass Highway Department. They mapped it out. I have those maps at home. Very precise, done by engineers, going measuring stuff they never measured before, basically. And then we got adopters for close to 100 trees, and then as, shall we say, Elm Watch, just to round out that little nonprofit history, concluded this is way too much management and coordination for over 22 towns. So we promoted the formation of tree committees, and some of them, like the Lanesboro Tree Committee, really has established themselves, and others so-so, and then working with tree wardens. But you know, tree wardens come and go, and administrations come and go, and budgets have to be reapproved, and so forth and so on. So we've seen a lot of loss of elms that are of magnificent proportion just in the last decade, and especially the last few years. And you'll see one in Sheffield on your way home, on the just north of town, and one in, hey, they're now stumps, unfortunately. Okay, so the kicker is iconic American tree. Eyes of the nation, the accumulation of the millions of objects in the Library of Congress, and the symbolism of e pluribus unum, and of the suffragettes, and of the American elm. So among the millions of objects in the Library of Congress, I got 2 pictures in the book that shows several hundred of those millions of objects. And there it is, appropriately enough, with a Walt Whitman poem accompanying it. So that was a happy moment in the year 2000, which was the 200th anniversary. Let's see, it was 2050, the 200th anniversary of the Library of Congress. Okay, then in here, just turn around, look behind Anne Irwin there. You see that shot from the moving point of view? I'm obviously behind the wheel of a car, and I'm driving into Sharon on Route 41, and from Amenia Union, and it's raining, and I have my Nicormat at my hand, and my steering wheel in my other hand, and I get that shot as the roadside landscape of iconic trees passes by me. 1, 2, 3, 4 American elms, none of which, of course, remain. And, but, shall we say, 1978, I was still working on the moving point of view arduously, and, but I was really photographing this as, you know, a roadside phenomenon that, you know, we drove beneath the elms for a century, from the 1800s till the introduction of disease in the 1930s, and really the massive collapse in the 60s that occurred. Okay, so then let's talk just about a few of these other things. Okay, here's a white oak. This happens to be over in New York State. It's just a magnificent shot because, hey, the sun has already gone down. I'm putting on a little tripod. I'm illuminating the trunk of a tree with a flashlight to get some texture on this side. In other words, I'm doing the reverse of the dodging and burning thing here. I'm burning with a flashlight, right? Here, this happens to be on our property in Canaan, Connecticut. I walked past these trees for 30 years before I got the picture and saw it there. It was the right light, and you know, it's cottonwoods with narrow, slow-growing, fast-growing cottonwoods with slow-growing hop hornbeam in front. And again, from an artistic point of view, it's like the charcoal drawing in that corner of the fire burn. Here we have the pencil, the almost the silver treatment here. So that's part of the artistry, and it's using the materials and getting the most out of them, quite honestly. Sometimes going for almost an ephemeral delicacy versus a, wow, you know, dare I say it, a masculine boldness. Here's a early tree, 1977, Cummington, Mass. Hey, I was commuting back and forth to Northampton back in those days, and sugar maple talk about the moment that it was in its brightest, most lemon-colored, flavored foliage, and translucent. Yale bought this. It's in other collections, and gosh, one of my early exposures in New York, the Cooper Hewitt Museum showed it back then as part of a series called the Artist Postcard Series. Here we are up in northern Maine, white cedars. Okay, that's a species that runs from, you know, Chicago, New Jersey up the, you know, through the Cape and up into Maine. It's, you know, we have our red native so-called red cedars, junipers, and here they are, kind of like the maple and cherry, but you know, this love affair is now skeletonized, and and then you see the slow effect of gravity as opposed to the collapse that might be associated with some trees toppling over, like all the ash trees that will be toppling over in the next 5 to 10 years without exception. This happens to be an introduced species. That's a European weeping beech, and you know, that photograph is about the graphic display of its branch structure, which is remarkable, admittedly. By the way, it's not an invasive introduced species. Here I am at the Joyce-Kilmer National Forest in North Carolina. Again, one of those, hey, I hiked in there. I couldn't quite get a handle on how to photograph these tulip trees that were so huge. I was in the cove, and then I come up to the edge of the ridge above the cove, and man, the sun has just gone down, and the wind just, the differential in temperature was like, wow, suddenly there was this rush of air over the ridge. And everything was, it was like, wow, what a Halloween experience that was. And so I just scurried around like a mouse on the ground, trying to position myself, shooting on my knees and sitting. And 1 second exposures because the light was so low. But I got the feel of that movement in the boughs, and that really whipping that was going on there. And indeed, because it's a long exposure, the still image captures some of that. Again, you need to kind of get in there and study it. Okay, so this body of work, we're shifting styles of photography here, and but we're dealing with the same subject matter, basically, the wooded landscape. However, in its larger context, this portfolio is called the moving point of view. So we saw that one of the elms on the side of the road, and in that effort, going back to my color photography days when we did our presentation at the state capitol with Lowell Weicker and Dick Chase and Edward Fales, and we're promoting multimodal transportation systems as opposed to over-reliance on the automobile. And then, of course, the oil embargo occurred in '73, and the Super 7, Super 44, the missing spoke from Hartford right through my garden, got nixed. So I was, by then, extremely well practiced in photographing behind the wheel, because for that slideshow, I was photographing the roadside development and the impact of highway development on the landscape. So steering wheel, camera, 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 and so forth. So I'm going to open up this bag for a second right here. Don't worry. Started out with a 35 millimeter camera until '83. Then I bought this thing. You know, I increased the weight by a factor of 10 and reduced the number of shots per roll by a factor of 5. So I'm going around with this thing now, and I'm shooting out. I can't even hold this thing anymore. You know, so with, you know, and then I shifted. I use this. The majority of the prints in that room are also from these. Anything from '83 on. So that. Points to the great physicality of this form of photography. I have a car, I have a camera. These are both machines with moving parts. I'm the guy that's juggling them, you know, at the same time. Different than an iPhone, for sure. I should get an iPhone, actually. I deserve one. God. At any rate, in 1973, when I was liberated from that didactic task and the highways were defeated, I took that skill and shifted from color to black and white, and took the Amtrak train to Colorado to help my friends build a house up at 9,000 feet, and gosh, I came back and I had some pretty interesting images in the darkroom. Again, 2 months later, I'm thinking, oh, that wasn't a bad idea. And then that resulted in some of those early acquisitions by MoMA. And so, okay, 70, 80, up through 92, I was doing this. And then I thought, God, multitasking may be getting beyond me at that point. And I thought, geez, I think I might go back to trees. But in the meantime, hey, in 92, I shot similar to that Joyce Kilmer shot, this exposure. I'm driving and shooting. I've got that sweep of motion. This is the burn area in Yellowstone after that intense fire season. And because I add the motion and I've got the light, again, it's after sunset, it's reigniting the flames almost in here, and the melting of the trees and the building. So there's that, in a still print, that history is starting again to be seen and unfold. Here, this is Sheffield. I'm just in the backwoods of one of the dirt roads in town, and I'm getting that wonderful sweep of motion. So I'm doing the sort of drawing and erasing on this, using motion to add a kind of impressionist quality. Here, hey, after my dental appointment in Sheffield, I got this shot. Hey, Yale University Art Gallery bought a bigger print of that. And by then, I'm really getting pretty clever about using this camera. This happens to be a wide-angle lens. So I'm driving along through the space, and I'm photographing and panning as I go by it. So I'm trying to anchor on a fulcrum almost in the space, a reference point. And that becomes the key to the success of these prints, which is that there's a center of focus, there is a resolution to stillness, there is this dynamic vortex also created by that technique. And here, the resolution to stillness is almost hiding back in this thicket. This was a sleeper. I only made one print of this, and I thought, it's too complicated. But now I love it. And then in this shot, Maine Woods, 1983. I had a show in that year in Greenwich, and this was the headliner for the announcement. But I'm driving in this direction. I'm steering. I'm shooting over the passenger wheel. I'm cheating a little bit. I'm backing up a few times and saying I should take a few more shots of this. This is birches in front of a conifer forest, so it really is a very Maine ecosystem. And I got to tell you, we're on our way up to Maine this afternoon, and I have an appointment at the Farnsworth. I hope to seal the deal on that one. Here I'm on actually Blue Ridge Mountains, and again I'm shooting out the side door, but I managed to create that beautiful capture of the light that's in the certain branches, and shoot, that shows up, and there's a few little edges there that keep this from becoming just a blurry picture. So there's that delicate balance. I got to have that resolve to stillness. And here, it happened, the vortex circles around this little tree here, the chosen stem here, that makes this space work. Now, I just got an email yesterday from, oh God, her name is, just now escapes me, but she was a Yale master's student, and Yale said the person who got the winning essay thesis was able to select a print from the Yale collection. And Dick Field, my dear friend, put out a bunch of images, and he said, some of these are very expensive. She didn't know exactly which ones they were. Obviously mine was the cheapest, but she picked mine, and now she's the director of the Arboretum at Guelph University in Ontario, and we just reestablished connection, And she sent me a selfie of her with her photograph on the wall behind her. So I'm so touched that, hey, someone actually, and she said in her email back to Dick Field and me, you know, after you showed me all those things, I couldn't decide. I had to leave it for the time being, but that was the image that stuck in her mind. It actually, you know, and stuck in her life, actually. So, so I guess those are a few photographs that I've highlighted as, you know, having had some lingering consequence, you know, whether it's in a museum or a Library of Congress or a personal collection. And we should try to wrap it up pretty rapidly here.